The courtroom was silent. The jury foreman stood up, unfolded a single sheet of paper, and read the word, "Not guilty." Twice, 3 times, 4 times. John Gotti walked out of that courthouse and into the New York City winter air, a free man. Again. The crowd outside erupted. People cheered. Women blew kisses. A reporter asked him how he felt. He smiled, fixed his tie, and said nothing. He didn't need to. The streets already knew. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and join our community. New episodes every week on the men who built empires from the shadows. John Gotti was acquitted 3 times in 3 separate federal trials. 3 times the United States government assembled its evidence, called its witnesses, and built its case. And 3 times it failed. The prosecutors had wiretaps, they had informants, they had surveillance photographs. None of it mattered. The press started calling him the Teflon Don. Nothing stuck. And for a brief, blazing moment in the 1980s, he was the most famous gangster in America. Not because he was the most powerful, but because he wanted to be. The year is 1978. New York City is still bleeding from a decade of fiscal collapse, rising crime, and street-level chaos. The Gambino crime family, the largest and most powerful of the 5 families that controlled organized crime in the city, is run by a quiet, careful man named Paul Castellano. Big Paul, they called him. He lived in a mansion on Staten Island that looked like the White House. He wore suits. He gave interviews. He thought of himself as a businessman, not a gangster. He banned drug dealing among his ranks, not out of morality, but out of caution. Narcotics brought federal attention. Federal attention brought prison. Prison brought informants. He understood the mathematics of exposure. John Gotti did not share that philosophy. Gotti was born in the South Bronx in 1940, the 5th of 13 children, raised in poverty so dense it had texture. By the time he was 12, he was running errands for the local mob crew. By 16, he had been arrested. By his 20s, he was a hijacker, a gambler, a street enforcer, a man who solved problems with his hands and his reputation. He was also, by every account, impossible to ignore. Broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed, with a jaw like a block of granite and eyes that never looked away first. He thrived on the energy of the street. Where Castellano wanted invisibility, Gotti craved presence. By the early 1980s, Gotti ran the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, Queens, a social club that was, in reality, the operational headquarters of one of the Gambino family's most profitable crews. He ran gambling operations, loan sharking, labor racketeering. His crew was loyal, aggressive, and deeply profitable. And Gotti himself was growing impatient. He watched Castellano retreat further into his mansion, further into his business dealings, further away from the streets that were the family's lifeblood. Resentment built slowly, then all at once. On the night of December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano arrived at Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street in Midtown Manhattan for a dinner meeting. He stepped out of his Lincoln Town Car and was shot 4 times in the head and chest before he reached the door. His underboss, Thomas Bellotti, was killed beside him. Gotti sat in a car across the street and watched. Within days, he was the boss of the Gambino family. Within weeks, the entire New York underworld understood that something had changed. The quiet era was over. What made Gotti dangerous was not violence. Plenty of mob bosses were violent. What made him dangerous was spectacle. He moved his headquarters to the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy. and held court there openly, greeting visitors, conducting business, allowing himself to be photographed. He wore cashmere overcoats that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He threw enormous block parties in Howard Beach for the 4th of July, handing out food and fireworks to the neighborhood, positioning himself as a man of the people. The FBI photographed everything. Gotti knew they were watching. He did it anyway. His 3 acquittals in 1986, 1987, and 1990 were not accidents. Gotti ran one of the most sophisticated jury tampering operations in the history of American organized crime. His people identified jurors, assessed their vulnerabilities, and made contact. Witnesses developed sudden memory problems. In one case, a man who had been prepared to testify against him recanted entirely. The government kept losing, and the press kept writing, and Gotti kept smiling, and the myth kept growing. At his peak, Gotti commanded a family of roughly 300 maid members and hundreds more associates. The Gambino family's annual earnings during his reign were estimated at over $500 million, drawn from construction rackets, garbage hauling, the garment district, gambling, and loan sharking spread across New York and New Jersey. He was not just a crime boss. He was a brand. And like every brand built on image rather than substance, it contained the seeds of its own destruction. The FBI changed its strategy. Instead of surveilling Gotti in the street, agents planted listening devices inside the Ravenite Social Club itself, in an upstairs apartment where Gotti believed conversations were safe. For months, they recorded him. They recorded him discussing murders. They recorded him ordering hits. They recorded him ridiculing his own captains, exposing the internal fractures of his organization. And they recorded his underboss, Salvatore Gravano, known as Sammy the Bull, in enough detail to offer him a deal he could not refuse. Gravano had carried out 19 murders in service of the Gambino family. In exchange for his testimony, the government offered him witness protection and a dramatically reduced sentence. He accepted. When Gotti's defense team learned that Sammy the Bull would take the stand against him, they understood that this time was different. This was not a witness who could be frightened or bought. This was the man who had stood beside Gotti for years, who knew every secret, every order, every body. John Gotti was convicted on April 2, 1992, on charges of murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and tax evasion. The jury deliberated for 13 hours and found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was 51 years old. He spent the remainder of his life at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, one of the most restrictive federal prisons in the country. He developed throat cancer, likely the result of decades of cigar smoking. He refused to cooperate with prosecutors. He refused to name names. He maintained the code until the end. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died in the prison hospital. He was 61 years old. The Gambino family survived him, as families always do, reorganizing quietly under new leadership, shedding the spotlight Gotti had so aggressively courted. Gravano, who had testified against the most famous gangster in America, eventually violated the terms of his witness protection by running an ecstasy distribution ring in Arizona. He was arrested, convicted, and imprisoned again. The man who brought down the Teflon Don turned out to be no cleaner than the man he destroyed. John Gotti was not the most powerful mob boss in American history. He was not the most ruthless, not the most sophisticated, not the most successful. What he was was the last one who believed the old mythology, that a man could walk the streets openly, wear the crown in public, and make the world watch. He understood something essential about America, that this country does not just tolerate spectacle, it rewards it until the moment it decides to make an example. The Teflon Don. The name itself was always a little wrong. Teflon means nothing sticks, but everything stuck eventually. The wires, the recordings, the testimony of the man he trusted most. What Gotti had was not Teflon. What he had was time, and the extraordinary, dangerous belief that time would never run out. Some men are built for the shadows. Gotti was built for the light. And in the end, the light is exactly what destroyed him. Word count: 1,561. 1,561.